I had many hobbies. As a boy, I was always interested in working with my hands more than my head. I loved building model aeroplanes, model boats, radio control, did all of that stuff. And I think that it was a very good, I think that was a very good lesson in engineering, I think, following that kind of a hobby. So, of course, with holidays and family holidays we used to have on the Norfolk Broads. And that was a great lesson in boating, because there was my godfather, Sir James Millard Tucker. He had his boat. We used to assemble my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, great personality. They had their cruiser, and they had a gang of people around them who were very animated. Not least my grandfather was kind of almost head of the pack, but we had another guy who was a magician. I remember David Nixon. You might remember him. He had a boat called It's Magic, of course. And then there was this funny little guy who had teeth and a gap in his teeth. He was known to me as Uncle George. But of course, it was George Formby. Remember him when I'm cleaning windows? You were a funny little guy. So this is what the family holidays every year. We're all cruised around together on the Broad, and of course they're all varnished hull and classic boats. And I have a great love of classic boats ever since that time, and still follow. And that was. And I think the happiest days of my life in Norfolk and cruising around on the Broads, and I learned a lot. And I always built a radio control model boat to take with me, so it was always something. My grandfather, I got that from my grandfather. He built beautiful models, and he used to buy and sell printing machines and restore them. A very successful business. And my godfather, Sir James Millard Tucker, of course, was a great high court trial judge, very well known and remembered much in many circles. And he was wonderful. He had a 1937 Garwood speedboat that he bought new before the war in 1937 in Chicago, shipped it over, and it was all varnished mahogany. And that was the fastest boat on the Broads at the time, and it was just a beautiful piece of kit, which eventually he gave to me. And later on, when I was about 15, 16, so the family, we had it, and then my father managed to sink it at the factory when he put it in one of the outdoor sort of pools that they had there. The wood didn't take up. He didn't know about that sort of thing. Anyway, but my love of classic boats stayed, and when I first got into the travel business and then started to make some money, I went back to the Broads, and I bought myself a very nice 40-foot cruiser there, lived on it for the winter, thoroughly enjoyed it. Then I thought, well, it's not really the place to be, so I went back working the next season, made more money again, met a chap in London who was a real wheeler dealer, had the first discotheque in London, in fact, called El Toro, a Jewish guy, very good-looking Jewish guy, and I met a lot of very influential people. I was at the Playboy Club, and met a lot of very, some of them not the best sort of people as well, all kinds of crazy people in those days, and I had dancer girlfriends. I remember Vicky Shellard, she was working for Dancing Pans people, and I had quite a few dancer girlfriends, and then we rented a beautiful house on the river at Maidenhead, just upriver from here. It was Richard Dimbleby's house, as a matter of fact. He'd sold it to some Canadians, and they went home, and then we rented it. It was a beautiful house on the island, Bolter's Island. We had a swimming pool there, and I brought the cruiser down from Norfolk, and we were having a great time, Barry and I. Life was very good. We used to buy and sell Rolls-Royce and Bentleys on the side, because our neighbour also had a boat, was the sales director for Jack Barclays at the time, so used to buy them on the side. We were making money, and life was very good. And Barry and I said, well, why the hell, we should go to the Mediterranean maybe. Let's buy something a bit better and faster. I sold my cruiser, and we bought a 50-foot fast motor yacht off a nightclub owner, New Zealander, in Bournemouth. Paid £13,000 for this vessel called Macaira, which was quite a lot of money at that time. didn't know much about the boat except that she'd been built before the war and that she was commandeered during the war. In fact, subsequently went to Dunkirk, but that's another story. And so I took it down to the Mediterranean, got as far as Jersey, and then I thought I don't have the experience of sea, so I hired a skipper who turned out to be Sir John Onslow, a penniless baronet, became a lifelong friend, eventually wound up skippering the Royal Saudi Arabian yacht before he retired. And so off we took Macaira to the Mediterranean, and I had a girlfriend with me, and Jack Cunningham, the former owner, came with us, and we had a lovely trip. I said, well, I'll pay for it, but I don't have much cash. I said, I got a diner's card. So I said to Sir John, I said, we need to jump from one port to another, but preferably where I can feed you all, because that's my obligation, where they take diners club. So we went from diners club, to had a wonderful, wonderful trip down to the Mediterranean. We pulled into Porto, of course, got dragged off to see the caves to sell us sherry. And I said, well, as long as you take diner's card, let's load up with your best vintage ports, you know. And so I did. I don't know whether they ever got paid, because the diner's card, when I got to Gibraltar, took the card off me. But so anyway, wound up with Macaira in the Mediterranean and in Puerto Banús. And when there were 4 boats in Puerto Banús, there was nothing near as cup of coffee was San Pedro, those of you who know the Mediterranean. And I spent some time there. They thought I was a smuggler. I wasn't, but I used to take the boat out at night and shut the engines off, and with a girlfriend I'd met in Pepe Moreno discotheque or something, and then we'd just come back into the port at about 8 or 9 in the morning, and of course they thought I was out there smuggling, so they went through the boat a few times, and eventually they kicked me out. They said, you're not really welcome here. So I took the boat I was going up to Mallorca, and I told my partner, Barry, I said, I'll let you know when I get to Mallorca, okay. And I got to Malaga, and I had a problem with one engine, and I knew I had to change the cylinder head gasket. It was overheating. So I was in the middle of doing that, and I heard a voice on the dockside. Ahoy there, Macaira! And very English voice, and I stuck my head out of the engine room, which was right at the stern of the boat. I said, yes, hello. And he said, I'm from the British consulate. I said, oh, really? He said, need chance a cup of tea? So I said, by all means, you know. So I dragged myself out of the engine. He said, well, the police are coming, the customs are coming down here. They're a bit suspicious of your boat. So I thought they had to call us to get permission. Your British flags. Yes. So he said, so anyway, they came along, and they looked around all over the boat and everything, about 2 hours. He stayed during that time, nice chap. And so finally it was all clear. And I said, what's the problem? He said, well, I don't see any problem. He said, but you must have aroused suspicion. And I said, well, I told him about Marbella girlfriends. Anyway, so I then carried on up to Almeria, and the next port. I was on my own, and went into Almeria, out with my binoculars, looked to see where I could dock the boat, because I was single-handed. Saw that there was all kinds of scenery on the dock side. Also, I'd noticed that there was a sort of a 19th century early sailing vessel outside at anchor out there. Anyway, it was a film set, so I pulled in there, and I got chatting to a couple of young Aussies who were working on the set, just doing something, and so we had drinks and had a laugh and a joke. And then a chap came along next morning and said, would you be interested in chartering your boat to us, because we need a fast boat to go out to where we're shooting film out at sea there. So yes, of course, absolutely. They paid me, I can't remember how much it was, but it was good money. And that started, because the film was called Route du Rhum, or Rum Route. It was a story of smuggling rum, and it was Brigitte Bardot, and I'm trying to think of the name of the French actor. He'll come to me in a moment. Anyway, so I spent probably about 10 days in total with Brigitte Bardot. Most days going out there, she stayed on the boat, they did makeup, and then she'd just get on and do her thing, and one thing and another. So I got to know her pretty well. She was very, very nice. I never couldn't take any pictures, of course, but one didn't have cameras and in those days very much so. So nice time with Brigitte Bardot, and she was charming. She was really lovely, and she was just as attractive and as pretty as you might have imagined. And then I moved on up to Mallorca, and but interestingly, I went into Ibiza because my father was living on Ibiza and had been for some years, and I hadn't been in contact with him or anything. But unbeknown to me at this time, because when I bought the boat originally, the name was Macaira, and my Jewish partner said, we have to change the name. I have to honour my wife, and my wife's actually the and so I said, right, okay. So we changed the name. So what's it going to be? He said Esther Barbara. In fact, it was Barbara Lasky was the Lasky's Radio. You remember Lasky's Radio? Yeah, Barbara Lasky. So I thought, oh God, what an awful name to put on this nice boat. So I had the actual varnish name board, had Esther Barbara paint. I did it on the other side. So when they came down to Gibraltar or Marbella, it went up as Esther Barbara. As soon as they went, I'd go back to Macaira. I never had the carving note signed in Gibraltar by the Admiralty to change the name of Fisher, so no wonder they were suspicious of me. And my partner had wondered why I'd been taking so long to get, and there were no trace of me. There was no contact in those days, was there really? And Heather, my sister, panicked, and so they called Lloyd's, and apparently the bell, they figured I was lost at sea off Almeria, off the Cabo de Gata somewhere. So they were my partner in the boat was already trying to claim on the insurance, and my sister was really worried, and I showed up in Ibiza. On the dockside waiting for me was my father. He said, I knew that you weren't it. He said, I knew you were going to show up here one day. And he just got in the car one day up on the hills because he could see the coming around into Ibiza. He said, I just somehow knew it was you, and went down. He was standing on the dockside waiting for me. I didn't know any of all this hoo-ha that was going on, of course. And so then I went to Mallorca, and then of course I kept the boat there for a while, and then went back and carried on with my travelling in the summer. I was offered a very good job actually to set up Camper and Nicholson's there in the marina. I could have been the biggest yacht broker in the business probably, but I didn't really want to work 12 months of the year. It was only 6 months. I was making plenty of money and boating and doing all the things I loved. In the other 6 months, why would I want to change that? But that started my life with boating, and I've owned motor yachts ever since. I've had some 22 motor yachts. And it's funny, at the beginning of my life with Macaira, that lovely built as a private motor yacht before the war, and then went during the war. She was then became part of the Air Force and was used as a tender, and went to Dunkirk and back, and then reverted to our original owner after the war, and then eventually I was to come to own all those years later in 1968, I think it was. But when I came upriver here with my last motor yacht, which I brought from America, from Florida, and brought her up here to be close to my sister, and I came over because I couldn't live in America any longer. Problem is with the 6-month situation and not wanting to be resident there, so I thought I'll ship my home over here. I passed a classic boatyard upriver from here, and I thought, that looks interesting, classic boats, wood boats, love wood boats. So after a couple of days, once I was set up in the marina, I went round there, and it turned out to be a classic boatyard, and now they've become the Dennets have become very good friends of mine, and we got chatting about boats, and I knew a lot of the old Broads boats and the wood boats in the early days, and Michael Dennett, same age as me, and said, and I said, well, I had one, the first one I went to the Med was called Macaira. He said, I've got one here called Macaira. And I said, really? Yes, he said, it was a British powerboat. I said, Christ, went out front, and of course it was Macaira. And she's just been, the current owner has just spent £350,000 on restoring her, and she just won the Classic Boat Restoration Award of the Year, and she's in the Classic Boat magazine and featured this month, in fact. So my whole life started with that boat, more or less, and at the end of my life here in my last boat, and there she is. It's quite an extraordinary coincidence. But of course, years in the Mediterranean, I never needed to. I never needed to live in this country, and I never wanted to. And I mostly lived on my boats. I would buy one in the winter, restore it, enjoy it, have a great time. Some I kept longer and chartered them out. But I spent winters in Marbella, where I had a great aunt living there, and I really loved and had good winters down there. Gibraltar, smuggling VCRs out of Gibraltar back into Spain. That was quite a good business for a while. And then winters in Mallorca, many good winters in Mallorca. 8 years in Beaulieu in the south of France. I enjoyed immensely. And finally, I returned to Mallorca in about 1992. A friend of mine had bought a very big sailing boat, 96 feet, a really good friend of mine, and he said, did I want to be a partner? I said, no. He said, well, come sailing. We decided to do the Atlantic Rally for Cruisers, which is a kind of friendly a transatlantic race, if you like, for which starts in the Canaries and finishes in Rodney Bay in St. Lucia. So we did that. We crossed the Atlantic in great style, air-conditioned comfort, water makers, had a great sail. So we actually left from Palma and went down to the Canaries and then across, and then Emir, my friend who owned the boat, in fact, he left, and I took her on up to Florida. There she got sold to Peter de Savary, and I thought Florida's for me. The Mediterranean and Mallorca became too crowded, too many boats. You could drop the hook in a little bay in the late afternoon, and then by the evening there were too many boats there. People didn't know, and the wind would drop at night, and then they're all bumping into each other. And I thought, this is too crowded, So I thought, this is it. So I decided to. So I sold my last motor yacht there in 1993, and decided to, after having sailed the Atlantic, unless I went back, and I went back to Florida and bought a motor yacht there. Bought a very nice 60-foot motor yacht, classic motor yacht, wooden one, and spent about refurbing her there during the winter months and returning to Europe. And so for the next 21 years or so, my life was spent working in Europe and carrying on travel, making a very, very good living, and wheeling or dealing, if you like, in boats in Florida, buying and selling them, enjoying them, cruising. And I went to the Bahamas a lot. I went down to the Caribbean, to the British Virgin Islands, Cuba many times, and it was just great cruising. And I just had a really fantastic life there. I just had the best time. You couldn't beat the climate. I always found that the winters in the Mediterranean were very pleasant, certainly more pleasant than they are in this country. But the problem was there, I felt, that the Mallorca, the weather's nice in the winter, but it's not always nice, but it's never quite cold enough to do nothing, and never quite warm enough to do something. It's never really, you didn't want to go boating that much. I mean, days were nice and sunny, you do it, but that was it.